In this video, we will set up the player to use 2D physics to collide and take damage. Back in our level 1 scene, we've got our player moving, but there's more we want our player to do than just be able to move around. We want our player to be able to take damage and lose the game. To do this, we are going to need to add a few more things to our player and the scene. First, let's add a health script to our player. Under our scripts folder, we have a health and damage folder, and then we have a health script. So let's drag and drop that onto our player. The health script we provide has several settings that control how the script works. The first setting is the team ID, which basically says what team or group the health belongs to. This works in tandem with the damage to keep friendly fire from happening. For our purposes, we are going to leave the player on team ID 0. But we are going to change the use lives setting to true because we want the player to have lives. Then the last settings we are going to change are the effects and polish settings. We already have these prefabs set up for you, so let's find these under the prefabs, effects, player folder. Then we can click and drag the player death and hit effects into their corresponding spots. Now to test this, we need something that can deal damage to the player. So let's go into our prefabs folder again, then enemies, individual enemies, stationary shooters, straight shooter, and drag one into our scene. And let's go into play mode. Now we can see and hear the enemy fire, but if we move into the line of fire, we don't actually get hit.
This is because we haven't set up any collision detection for our player. We don't have it using physics yet, so the projectile cannot hit the player and affect the health script. There are two different physics engines in Unity, one for 2D and one for 3D. And this distinction is important because the two do not interact with each other. So for this project, make sure you use the 2D versions of the physics components. So let's do that.
Click on the player game object, and then in the inspector, find add component, and you can see a physics and a physics 2D option. In this project, we want physics 2D, and then we want a rigid body 2D. So now our player will be affected by physics. So let's hit play to see what the default setup looks like. And now our player falls downward, which we don't want, so let's go back to look at the settings on this rigid body 2D component, and we can see that there's a gravity scale setting. So let's try setting that to 0. Now let's hit play again. Now our player is using physics without gravity, but the projectiles of the enemy still phase through the player. Why? Because the rigid body 2D is only part of the physics puzzle. The other part is the Collider 2D components. We can see an example of this if we click on our enemy. If we scroll to the bottom of its components, we can see that it has a rigid body 2D and a polygon Collider 2D. And that collider is what shows up in the scene view as these green lines, which are the extents of that collider. We want the same thing for our player, so let's go back to them. And real quick before I forget, let's give the rigid body 2D a few more settings changes to make it work a little better. Let's change collision detection from discrete to continuous. This makes the collision detection happen more smoothly. And let's change the sleeping mode to never sleep. Changing to never sleep means the rigid body will always be active, which we want for our player just to make sure the collisions happen. Okay, now let's add another component through add component. Let's use the search bar this time, and let's search for Collider 2D. From here, you can see that there are a lot of different 2D colliders to work from. All of them will work with the 2D rigid body, but for our purposes, we want the Polygon Collider 2D because it lets us form the shape of the collider we want. Now you can see in the scene view, the the Polygon Collider tries to match itself to the sprite based on transparency values, so it thinks this is the best fit, which obviously doesn't completely match the ship perfectly. So what we can do is look back at the Polygon Collider 2D component and select Edit Collider. What this lets us do then is click anywhere along the edges of the collider lines, and then drag and reshape the collider by moving these points. So let's just play around with this for a bit until we get the collider shape to roughly match the player's spaceship. Once you are satisfied with that, hit play mode again and try to get hit by the enemy projectiles. Now the player can get hit and explode.